Seattle, Washington, 1982. A 7-year-old girl vanishes after her ballet class on a rainy winter evening. For 43 years, her family searches desperately. Police find no answers, the case goes cold. Then in 2025, renovation workers make a chilling discovery in the basement of an abandoned building. Carrie Lindholm is finally identified through DNA. Her family receives closure they waited over 4 decades for, and a killer is brought to justice. How did construction work and forensic science finally solve a mystery that haunted Seattle for generations? Stay with us as we uncover this tragic case. Hello and welcome to the DNA Archives, where we dive deep into cold cases, missing persons, and the mysteries that DNA finally solves. If you're drawn to stories where persistence meets science and families find peace after decades of uncertainty, you're in the right place. Please hit the like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a case. Now let's go back to where this heartbreaking story began. January 12, 1982, Capitol Hill neighborhood, Seattle, Washington. It was a Tuesday evening, dark by 5 o'clock, rain falling steadily the way it does in Seattle winters, turning streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. The temperature hovered just above freezing, cold enough that breath formed clouds, warm enough that the rain wouldn't turn to snow. At the Emerald City Dance Studio on Broadway Avenue, 7-year-old Carrie Lindholm was finishing her ballet class. Carrie was small for her age, delicate features, long auburn hair that her mother always braided before dance class, hazel eyes that seemed too serious for a child. She had been taking ballet for 2 years. She loved it. The music, the movement, the pink leotard and tights she wore every Tuesday and Thursday. That evening, she wore her dance clothes under a purple puffer jacket, black leggings, and rain boots decorated with ladybugs. She carried a small backpack with her street shoes and a snack her mother had packed. Carrie's parents were divorced. The split had been messy, filled with arguments about custody and visitation. Her mother, Diane Lindholm, was a freelance illustrator who worked from a small apartment on Capitol Hill. She had primary custody. Her father, Robert Lindholm, was a software engineer at Boeing. He lived in Bellevue, had Carrie every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. The arrangement was complicated, tension-filled. Both parents loved Carrie fiercely but could barely stand to be in the same room. That Tuesday was supposed to be Robert's evening. He was scheduled to pick Carrie up from dance class at 6:15, take her to dinner, drop her back at Diane's by 8. But at 5:45, Robert called the studio. He was stuck in traffic on the 5I-20 bridge. An accident had everything backed up. He would be at least 30 minutes late. The studio instructor, a woman named Miss Elena, told him not to worry. Carrie could wait in the lobby. She would stay with her until Robert arrived. Carrie finished class at 6 o'clock, changed out of her ballet slippers into her rain boots, put her jacket on, sat in the lobby on a bench near the front window. Miss Elena was in the back office counting registration fees for the month. The studio door was unlocked. Parents were still picking up children from the earlier class. At 6:10, Miss Elena glanced into the lobby. Carrie was still there, swinging her legs, looking out the window at the rain. At 6:15, Robert called again, still stuck in traffic. Maybe another 15 minutes. Miss Elena told him Carrie was fine, reading a book she had in her backpack. At 6:25, Miss Elena walked to the lobby to check on Carrie. The bench was empty. Miss Elena's heart skipped. She walked to the bathroom, called Carrie's name. No answer. She checked the changing room, the studio floor, the back office. Carrie was gone. Miss Elena ran to the front door, looked up and down Broadway Avenue, rain pouring, pedestrians rushing past with umbrellas, cars splashing through puddles. No sign of Carrie's purple jacket, no sign of her at all. Miss Elena grabbed the phone, called Robert first. "Mr. Lindholm, did you already pick up Carrie?" Robert's voice was confused. "No, I'm still stuck on the bridge. I'm about 10 minutes away now." Miss Elena's voice shook. "She's not here. I looked away for just a few minutes and now I can't find her." Robert's blood turned to ice. "Call the police. Call them right now. I'm coming." Miss Elena dialed 911, her hands trembling so badly she could barely press the buttons. Within 10 minutes, Seattle police arrived. 2 officers began searching the immediate area, questioning people on the street. "Did you see a little girl, 7 years old, purple jacket, rain boots with ladybugs?" Most people shook their heads, kept walking. It was dark and rainy. Everyone was focused on getting home. One man, a bus driver waiting at a nearby stop, remembered seeing a small girl in a purple jacket walking north on Broadway around 6:15, but he couldn't be sure. Another witness, a woman leaving a bookstore, thought she saw a child getting into a green van parked on a side street, but she didn't get a good look. Couldn't describe the driver. Robert arrived at 6:40, ran into the studio, his face pale with terror. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" The police questioned him. "When did you last speak to the studio? What time were you supposed to pick her up? Where exactly are you coming from?" Robert answered everything, showed them his work ID, his phone records, his location on the bridge during the accident. At 7 o'clock, Diane was called. She had been home working on an illustration deadline, had no idea anything was wrong. When the police told her Carrie was missing, she let out a scream that the officers would remember for the rest of their lives. She drove to the studio in minutes, burst through the door, saw Robert standing with police. "What happened? What did you do?" Robert's voice broke. "I was stuck in traffic. I called. I told them I'd be late." Diane turned on Miss Elena. "You were supposed to be watching her. How could you let this happen?" Miss Elena was sobbing. "I only looked away for a few minutes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." By 8 o'clock, the search had expanded. K-9 units, more officers, volunteers from nearby businesses. They combed through alleys, checked dumpsters, knocked on doors of every building within a 6-block radius. By midnight, Carrie's photo was on every news station in Seattle. Her auburn braid, her serious hazel eyes, her purple jacket. And by morning, there was still no trace of her. The first week was pure chaos. Seattle police interviewed everyone connected to the dance studio. Every parent, every instructor, every person who had been in the building that evening. Miss Elena was questioned extensively. She passed a polygraph test. Her timeline matched security camera footage from a nearby convenience store. She had been in the back office exactly when she said Carrie had simply vanished in those 15 minutes. The green van mentioned by the witness became the focus. Police tracked down every green van registered in King County, interviewed the owners, searched the vehicles. None of them connected to Carrie. The bus driver's statement about seeing a girl in purple walking north led to a massive search of that direction. Officers went door to door for blocks, checked every business, every apartment building. Nothing. Robert and Diane were both investigated thoroughly. Standard procedure in cases involving divorced parents. Police always look at family first. Both had solid alibis. Robert's was ironclad with phone records and traffic camera footage. Diane had been home on a deadline with phone calls to her editor as proof. The divorce records were examined, looking for any hint of custody disputes that might have escalated. But despite their mutual dislike, neither parent was considered a suspect. FBI child abduction specialists were brought in. They analyzed the timeline, the location, the weather conditions. Their assessment was grim. Given the quick disappearance and lack of witnesses, this appeared to be a planned abduction by someone who knew the area. By February, 3 weeks after Carrie vanished, the leads had dried up. Tips still came in, sightings from as far away as Portland and Vancouver, but none of them led to Carrie. The case was featured on local news programs. Posters with Carrie's face covered telephone poles throughout Capitol Hill. The dance studio closed permanently. Miss Elena unable to continue after the trauma. Diane quit working. She couldn't focus on illustrations when her daughter was missing. She spent her days walking Broadway Avenue, staring at every child she passed, hoping for a miracle. Robert took leave from Boeing. He drove the streets of Seattle every night, searching parking lots, asking homeless people if they had seen anything, showing Carrie's photo to anyone who would look. The two of them could barely speak to each other without fighting. Diane blamed Robert for being late. Robert blamed the studio for not watching her closely enough. Their shared grief became a weapon they used against each other. By summer of 1982, 6 months had passed. The case was officially cold. A new detective, a veteran named Frank Morrison, inherited the file. He promised the family he would never stop looking, but they could see the resignation in his eyes. Diane fell into a deep depression. She was hospitalized twice for suicide attempts. Her sister moved in to take care of her, to make sure she ate, to keep her from giving up entirely. Robert threw himself back into work, spending 18-hour days at Boeing, volunteering for every project, every overtime shift, anything to avoid going home to his empty house. By 1985, 3 years had passed. Diane had moved out of Seattle. The city held too much pain. She relocated to Olympia, tried to start over. She joined a pottery class, started creating ceramic pieces. It was the only thing that kept her hands busy, kept her mind from spiraling. Every piece she made, she inscribed Carrie's initials on the bottom, CL, a small memorial in clay. Robert remained in Bellevue. He never remarried, never dated. His entire life became work and the occasional awkward phone call with Diane about the case. Every January 12th, the anniversary of Carrie's disappearance, Diane would drive back to Seattle, stand outside the old dance studio location, now a coffee shop, and leave flowers. Purple flowers, Carrie's favorite color, and a small pair of ballet slippers she had saved. Robert would join her. They would stand in silence for a few minutes, then leave without speaking, their grief too heavy for words. By 1990, 8 years had passed. Detective Morrison retired. The case was reassigned to a younger detective who had never met Carrie, who only knew her as a name in a file. Diane had built a life in Olympia, teaching pottery classes, living quietly. But Carrie's absence was always there, a shadow over everything. She kept Carrie's room intact for years before finally packing the belongings into boxes. She couldn't throw them away, but couldn't look at them every day anymore. Robert developed health problems, high blood pressure, anxiety. His doctor told him the stress was killing him, but he didn't know how to let go of the guilt. By 2000, 18 years had passed. Carrie would have been 25 years old. Diane wondered what she would have looked like, if she would have continued dancing, if she would have gone to college, fallen in love, had children of her own. The questions haunted her every single day. Robert wondered if Carrie would have forgiven him for being late, for not being there when she needed him. The guilt ate at him like acid. In 2005, DNA databases were becoming more common. Diane submitted her DNA to every registry she could find, hoping that somehow it would lead to answers. Nothing came back, no matches, no leads. By 2010, 28 years had passed. Diane was 63 years old. Robert was 67. Both of them had accepted that they would probably die without knowing what happened to their daughter. Detective work on the case had essentially stopped. It was reviewed occasionally as part of cold case initiatives, but with no new evidence, there was nothing to pursue. Diane continued making pottery, each piece still marked with CL. Her life's work had become a memorial to the daughter she lost. Robert finally retired from Boeing in 2015. He moved to a smaller condo, spent his days reading and walking, trying to find peace he knew he would never have. By 2020, 38 years had passed. Both parents were elderly now, their health declining, their hope nearly extinguished. And then in early 2025, everything changed. A commercial real estate developer purchased a block of old buildings on Capitol Hill, planning to demolish them and build modern apartments. One of those buildings was an abandoned warehouse that had been empty since the early 1990s. On March 3, 2025, demolition crews broke through the basement walls and made a discovery that would finally answer the question that had haunted Seattle for 43 years. March 3, 2025, construction workers were demolishing a 4-story brick warehouse on East Pike Street, just 3 blocks from where the Emerald City Dance Studio used to be. The building had been abandoned since 1991, windows boarded up, graffiti covering the walls. It had become a haven for squatters and urban explorers over the decades. The demolition crew was breaking through the basement level when one of the workers noticed something unusual behind a false wall. The wall appeared to be newer than the rest of the basement, poorly constructed, like someone had built it quickly to hide something. The foreman ordered the crew to carefully remove the bricks rather than demolish them. What they found behind that wall made everyone step back in horror. A small storage room no more than 8 feet by 8 feet completely sealed off, and inside, skeletal remains partially clothed, along with a child's backpack covered in dust and decay. The crew immediately stopped work, called Seattle police within an hour. The site was swarmed with investigators and forensic teams. Dr. James Park, the King County medical examiner, supervised the careful excavation of the remains. Based on the size and bone development, he determined they belonged to a child, approximately 6 to 8 years old at time of death. The remains had been there for decades. The dry conditions of the sealed room had preserved some fabric and personal items. Among the items found were fragments of purple nylon fabric, the remnants of what appeared to be a winter jacket. Also found were small rain boots, badly deteriorated but still showing traces of a pattern. Dr. Park thought it might have been ladybugs. And the backpack, when carefully opened, contained a child's street shoes size 2 and a water-damaged book. Detective Sarah Chen, who now headed the cold case unit, immediately began cross-referencing missing children cases from the 1980s and early 1990s. The location was Capitol Hill. The age range was right, the purple jacket detail was specific. When she pulled up Carrie Lindholm's file, her hands started shaking. Missing since January 1982, 7 years old. Last seen wearing a purple puffer jacket and rain boots with ladybugs, disappeared 3 blocks from this exact location. Detective Chen called the medical examiner. We need to fast-track DNA on these remains. I think I know who this is. She also made the hardest call of her career. She had to contact Diane and Robert Lindholm. Diane was 78 years old now, living in a retirement community in Olympia. She had survived cancer twice, outlived most of her friends, spent 4 decades waiting for this call. Mrs. Lindholm, this is Detective Sarah Chen from Seattle PD. I'm calling about Carrie's case. We've found remains that we believe may be her. Diane couldn't speak. She sat down heavily in her chair, tears already forming. Detective Chen continued gently. We need a DNA sample from you to confirm the identity. Can you come to Seattle, or would you like us to send someone to you? Diane whispered, I'll come to you. Robert was 82, still living in his condo in Bellevue, when Detective Chen called him. He had been expecting this call for 43 years. He drove to the police station the next morning. Diane arrived an hour later. It was the first time they had seen each other in person in over 5 years. They sat in the waiting room together, not speaking. Just 2 elderly people who had loved the same child and lost her in the worst possible way. Both provided DNA samples, simple cheek swabs that would finally answer the question that had defined their entire lives. The waiting was excruciating. Even though Diane and Robert both knew in their hearts that it was Carrie, they needed the confirmation. 2 weeks later, on March 18, 2025, Detective Chen called with the results. Mrs. Lindholm. Mr. Lindholm, the DNA is a match. The remains are Carrie. I'm so deeply sorry. Diane let out a sound like a wounded animal. After 43 years, she finally knew. Her daughter hadn't run away, hadn't been taken across the country. She had been 3 blocks away this entire time, sealed behind a wall, alone in the darkness. Robert sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. He had spent 43 years carrying guilt. Now he had confirmation that he would carry it to his grave. Detective Chen continued. Based on the forensic evidence, we believe Carrie died shortly after she was taken. The sealed room suggests this was planned. We're treating this as a homicide. Do you know who did this? Diane asked, her voice barely audible. We're investigating, Detective Chen said. The building where she was found has a complicated ownership history. We're tracking down everyone who had access to it in 1982. The investigation moved quickly now that they had a crime scene. Forensic teams returned to the basement. They documented everything, measured the false wall, analyzed the construction. The bricks and mortar used to build the wall were tested. They dated to the early 1980s, consistent with the timeline. Hidden behind loose bricks, investigators found something else. A worn leather wallet containing an ID card. The name on the ID was Martin Kowalski. The photo showed a man in his 30s with dark hair and a mustache. Detective Chen ran the name through databases. Martin Kowalski had been the building superintendent from 1979 to 1985. He had access to every room, every basement, every locked door. In 1982, he would have been 36 years old. Detective Chen pulled his background. What she found was chilling. Kowalski had been questioned briefly after Carrie disappeared. He worked in a building on Capitol Hill, lived alone, but his alibi was that he had been home that evening. No one could confirm or deny it. There was no evidence connecting him to the case. He was cleared. In 1991, Kowalski left Seattle abruptly, told his employer he was moving to Alaska, never provided a forwarding address. The timing was suspicious. 1991 was when the building was sold and scheduled for renovations. Kowalski would have known that the basement would eventually be discovered. Detective Chen tracked Kowalski through records. He had died in 2003 in Anchorage, Alaska, of liver failure. He was 57 years old. He had lived under his own name, worked maintenance jobs, never married, died alone in a veterans hospital. DNA was requested from the Alaska Medical Examiner's office, tissue samples that had been stored from his autopsy. The samples were compared to trace evidence found in the sealed room, skin cells on the backpack strap, touch DNA on the bricks. 3 weeks later, the results came back. It was a match. Martin Kowalski's DNA was all over that room. Detective Chen called Diane and Robert with the news. We've identified the person responsible. His name was Martin Kowalski. He died in 2003. There would be no trial, no justice in the traditional sense, but at least they knew the truth. Detective Chen spent weeks piecing together Martin Kowalski's life, trying to understand the man who had stolen Carrie Lindholm's future. What emerged was a portrait of a deeply troubled individual who had hidden in plain sight for decades. Martin Kowalski was born in 1946 in Tacoma, Washington. His childhood was marked by instability and abuse. His father was an alcoholic who disappeared when Martin was 10. He dropped out of high school at 16, drifted through various jobs, mostly janitorial and maintenance work that required minimal human interaction. In 1968, at age 22, Kowalski was arrested for breaking into an elementary school after hours. He claimed he was looking for tools he had left behind. The charges were dropped due to lack of evidence, but the principal reported that Kowalski had been seen watching children during recess on multiple occasions. In 1973, he was questioned in connection with the disappearance of a young girl in Spokane, but again there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. That case remains unsolved to this day. In 1979, Kowalski moved to Seattle, took a job as building superintendent for a property management company that owned several older buildings on Capitol Hill. The warehouse on East Pike Street was one of them. Kowalski lived in a small apartment in the building, had keys to every door, knew every corner of the structure. Neighbors from that time described him as quiet, strange, someone who made them uncomfortable but they couldn't articulate why. One former tenant remembered that Kowalski would often be outside in the evenings, smoking cigarettes, watching people walk by. Another recalled that he seemed particularly interested when children passed. His gaze would follow them down the street. On January 12, 1982, investigators believe Kowalski was near the dance studio, possibly watching, possibly waiting for an opportunity. When Carrie stepped outside, alone, confused about why her father hadn't arrived yet, Kowalski approached her. He may have told her he was sent by her father, or that he knew where her mother was. Whatever he said convinced a trusting 7-year-old to follow him. The walk from the dance studio to the warehouse was less than 3 blocks in the rain and darkness. With everyone hurrying to get indoors, no one would have noticed a man walking with a small child. Kowalski took her to the warehouse basement, to a storage room he had access to. What happened next is unclear and perhaps better left unspoken. The medical examiner determined that Carrie died from asphyxiation, likely within hours of being taken. She did not suffer for long. Kowalski then sealed her body behind a false wall he constructed, using materials he had access to as the building superintendent. He continued working, continued living in the building, walked past that basement wall every single day for years. In 1985, he quit his job, told his employer he wanted a change, moved to a different building across town. But he didn't leave Seattle entirely, not yet. He stayed for 6 more years. In 1991, when the warehouse was sold and the new owners announced plans for renovations, Kowalski panicked. He knew the basement would be examined, knew the wall might be discovered, so he fled to Alaska, lived there under his own name for 12 years. He worked as a janitor at an office building in Anchorage, kept to himself, drank heavily. His liver eventually failed in 2003. Hospital records showed he died alone. No family, no friends, no one claimed his body. He was cremated and his ashes scattered at sea. Detective Chen shared all of this with Diane and Robert. She sat with them in a quiet office, showed them photos of Kowalski, explained the timeline. Diane stared at Kowalski's photo with an intensity that made Detective Chen uncomfortable. This was the man who had destroyed her life, who had stolen her daughter. Why her? Diane asked quietly. Why Carrie? Detective Chen shook her head. We may never know. Predators like Kowalski don't need a reason. They see vulnerability and they act. Robert asked the question he had been dreading. Did she suffer? Detective Chen chose her words carefully. Based on the medical examiner's findings, it happened quickly. She wouldn't have been in that room for long. It was small comfort, but it was all they had. The case received massive media coverage. Seattle newspapers ran front-page stories. National news outlets picked it up. The community was shocked that Carrie had been so close all along, that people had walked past that building for 43 years, with no idea what was hidden inside. The property owner issued a statement expressing sorrow and cooperating fully with the investigation. The building was completely demolished shortly after. The site would remain empty. The developer decided against building there out of respect. A temporary memorial appeared at the location. People left flowers, ballet slippers, photos of Carrie from the original missing posters. Diane and Robert both visited the site. They stood in the rain, just as it had rained the night Carrie disappeared, and cried for the little girl who never came home. On April 15, 2025, Carrie Lindholm was finally laid to rest at Evergreen Cemetery in Seattle. The funeral was attended by hundreds, former classmates who were now in their 50s, teachers who remembered her, members of the community who had never forgotten her case. Robert gave the eulogy, his voice shaking with emotion. Carrie was 7 years old. She loved ballet. She loved rainy days. She deserved to grow up, to live, to be happy. Diane sat in the front row, holding a small ceramic bowl she had made glazed in purple, Carrie's initials carved into the bottom. When it was time to lower the casket, Diane placed the bowl inside along with a pair of pink ballet slippers. "Dance forever, baby, you're free now." After the funeral, Diane felt something shift inside her. Not healing, she would never fully heal, but release. For 43 years she had carried the weight of not knowing. Now she could finally let Carrie rest. It has been several months since Carrie Lindholm was finally laid to rest. Several months since Diane and Robert got the answers they waited 43 years to receive. The pain hasn't disappeared. Wounds this deep never fully heal, but there is something different now. Something that allows them to breathe a little easier. Closure. Diane still visits Carrie's grave every week. She brings fresh flowers, usually purple irises, and sits on the bench nearby talking to her daughter. She tells Carrie about her pottery students, about the seasons changing, about how much she wishes things had been different. "You're home now, sweet girl. You're finally home, and I can rest knowing you're at peace." Diane has channeled her decades of grief into something meaningful. She established the Carrie Lindholm Foundation, dedicated to improving safety protocols at children's activities. The foundation works with dance studios, gymnastic centers, and after-school programs to implement check-in and check-out systems, ensuring no child is ever left alone. She speaks at safety conferences, shares Carrie's story, pushes for legislation requiring background checks for all building maintenance staff who work near children's facilities. Her pottery has taken on new meaning too. She creates memorial pieces for other families who have lost children, each one inscribed with initials, each one a small act of remembrance. Robert visits Carrie's grave whenever his health allows. He's 82 now, his mobility limited, but he makes the journey as often as he can. He and Diane have found an unexpected peace with each other in these final years. The anger and blame that divided them for decades has dissolved. They meet for